There are times when the Bible describes, and we'll see this here in a moment, where the Bible describes the Holy Spirit, and it could be either way because it's nuanced. It could go either way, whether it's a Unitarian description or a Trinitarian description, whether it's a triadic description. And admittedly, sometimes we Trinitarians simply have to admit and concede that what we're reading is consistent with the Trinitarian reading, but is not exclusively triadic or Trinitarian. So let me give you the example. Let's just jump right into it. In the book of Genesis, starting in verse 1 from the ESV, we read, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Starting in verse 2, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." And we don't need to read verse 3. That's a different lesson. But just look at the first two verses. Right? "In the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth." And then in verse 2, "The Spirit of God hovers over the face of the waters," or the surface of the waters. If we scroll over to the Hebrew on the other side of the page here, we can see that the Hebrew word for God is, let me highlight it for you, right there. This Hebrew word Elohim. Elohim. And we've heard this before. It's a plural male noun or masculine noun in the Hebrew. But this word for Elohim is the same word that shows up in verse 2 when it says the Spirit of God. Let's highlight that part in the Hebrew. It says V'ruach Elohim. Right? This is broken up into three words. The first letter, V, is the consonant. The heavens and earth and I'm sorry, it's the word. It's the conjunction and. I said consonant. I meant conjunction. Drawing a blank there. So it's a conjunction and the vav there. And then the next word is ruach, R-U-A-C-H in the English, ruach, and spirit. And then the third word is Elohim, just like we saw earlier, Elohim. Okay, so we could say from a Unitarian perspective that the Spirit of God is simply another way of describing God, who is a spirit. The Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the waters, or over the face of the waters. The panei chamaim, literally the face of the waters. Is this Spirit a separate person? Unitarians would say no. It's the Spirit of God. And using that definition of example here, like, for instance, the Spirit of Ariel, or the spirit of other living beings that we know to be in the earth today, no one imagines that the Spirit of Ariel is a separate person or entity, separate and distinct from Ariel himself. In fact, to be sure, the last time I checked, and I'm the authority on this subject since it's me, the last time I checked, I can't send my spirit out of my body to do work for me and accomplish something for me that I, the body, could sit back and observe. Understand what I'm saying here? Understand my example? Person number 1 is the body of Ariel. Person number 2 is the spirit of Ariel, and the body sends the spirit to go do some task, right? I'd love to be able to send my spirit to go wash the dishes every day, then the body wouldn't have to do all that, right? That would really be nice, but fortunately it doesn't work that way. But in the Unitarian model, it's not necessary because the Spirit of God is God the Spirit. That's the Unitarian understanding of this passage. However, the Trinitarian understanding says the Spirit of God is a separate spirit, a separate person from God, who also is a spirit. So we have Spirit A sending Spirit B to do some work. What work is Spirit B doing? He's hovering over the face of the waters and doing whatever he's going to do. But the point being is Moses didn't make this distinction. It's kind of nuanced discussion. He simply says the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the waters. Who is this separate spirit? And is it necessarily that Moshe understood it to be a separate spirit? Well, he didn't elaborate. So that's why I mean by a little bit nuance, a little bit of equivocation, a little bit of ambiguity here, meaning the argument from the Unitarian side and the argument from the Trinitarian side can go either way. We need more context, and unfortunately Moshe didn't give us any more in this verse. We have to use other verses that supply more detail if we were to try and figure out if this is a triadic passage, a Trinitarian passage, talking about the Holy Spirit, or if it's simply that God, who is a spirit, was himself hovering over the surface of water. But again, it begs the question, again, I'll leave off with this point without confusing you. At face value, the normative understanding of the passage is that God in verse 1, the Elohim of verse 1, is sending the Ruach Elohim of verse 2 to do something for him. Right? Otherwise, Moses would have said, and the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and God hovered over the surface of the waters. Right? We wouldn't have the Vuruach. If it's just God who is a spirit who's hovering over the surface of the waters, why did Moses write Vuruach Elohim? Why does it say in the Spirit of God? In fact, to complicate the matters a little bit more, make it a little bit more challenging, the word of is supplied by translators in the Spirit of God. It actually just says Vuruach Elohim and Spirit God, almost as if it's a personal name, right? Spirit Elohim. Elohim created the heavens and the earth, but Spirit Elohim hovered over the surface of the waters. As if we have two separate Elohims, or two separate persons of God. And the first person is known as Elohim, and the second person is known as Ruach Elohim, or third person in the Trinitarian lineup. Okay, you guys understanding where I'm going with this? So we're going to be doing things like this. We'll be looking at passages, and we'll be challenging ourselves by looking at some of the original languages. We won't do that for every single passage. Let's just take a look at the very first passage. Oh, by the way, I pulled up the, for my reference, I pulled up the Greek of the first passage just to compare it against the Hebrew. And the Greek word is theos, that shows up in verse 1 for Elohim. And then in verse 2, it's pneuma theou, the Spirit of God, or Spirit God again. So same thing. There's no disconnect between the Hebrew and the Greek. No, sometimes the Greek uses choices of words that are a little misleading or challenging from the Hebrew. Sometimes the words that are chosen, again, this is a translation, so although we can't say for certain that it was inspired by God, we can't say that it was rejected by the early Christians either, right? It was in fact used by them, so it received that level of endorsement at least. But the point, or germane to our study, is that some of the wording is a little bit odd at places. But here, nothing is particularly challenging, right? God is theos, or theon, or theou, or some derivative of that particular case, and so it kind of just fits. All right, so nothing to really look at.